In 1347, a woman named Fatima stood before a judge, her eyes crusted with dried blood, her face hidden behind an iron mask. For 6 months, she had lived inside that mask, a device engineered not just to punish, but to transform simple sight into a deadly gamble. The spikes embedded within it weren't meant to kill outright. No, they were designed with chilling precision, to pierce, slowly, leaving a woman with a haunting choice every time she dared to move her head, a choice between seeing the world or losing her eyesight forever. And the most terrifying part, this wasn't some isolated medieval nightmare. Between the 9th and 18th centuries, historians estimate that between 2,000 and 5,000 women were forced to endure this exact torment. Yet the real reason behind these masks remained buried in history, hidden beneath layers of legal texts, patriarchal traditions, and intellectual brilliance that Europe at the time could only dream of. To understand the full horror of the Iron Mask, we need to travel back to the 9th century, into the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, an empire stretching from North Africa to Central Asia. At its core was a concept called nemos. Nemos loosely translates as honor, but not the kind you're imagining. This was a rigid, almost legalistic form of honor, a concept of possession and control. In elite Persian society, a woman's gaze wasn't merely her own. It belonged first to her father, then her husband, and later, her sons. To look freely, to meet the world with unshackled eyes, that was considered theft. Now, here's the paradox. The Abbasid Caliphate was also one of history's most intellectually advanced civilizations. While Europe grappled in the so-called Dark Ages, Baghdad thrived with hospitals, universities, and the legendary House of Wisdom, a library that could rival the modern world. So, how could a society that invented algebra and pioneered medicine also produce a device capable of blinding women for making eye contact? The answer lies in a 9th century law, buried in legal texts that classified these iron masks not as tools of punishment, but as protective clothing. Protective clothing. Think about that for a second. The same legal framework that dictated modest dress also legalized a device designed to mutilate, to turn natural human instinct, the urge to look, to see, to react, into a slow, agonizing death sentence. Once that door was opened, cruelty walked freely through it. And here's the kicker. The crime the mask punished wasn't religious, it wasn't moral, it was financial. And this is where the story becomes truly insidious. The mask itself was a masterpiece of precision-engineered horror. Imagine a cold iron shell lined on the inside with 12 spikes, 6 aimed at each eye. These weren't haphazard points of metal. Each spike stopped exactly 3 millimeters from the cornea when the head was perfectly still, the eyes looking straight ahead. 3 millimeters, the width of 2 human hairs. The mask locked at the back of the head, accessible only to a guardian, usually a male relative or religious authority. And the real terror? You could survive wearing it, as long as you never moved. Turn your head, even slightly, and the spikes would pierce your eyes. Look up at the sky, down at your feet, anywhere beyond a straight gaze, and you invited injury. Our knowledge of this nightmare comes from Al-Jahis, a 9th century scholar best known for his zoological works. Buried in his writings is a chilling description of what he called the Iron Veil, a mask designed to correct a wandering gaze. Al-Jahis writes, "The Iron Veil teaches patience through proximity to consequence. The woman learns stillness, for movement brings its own punishment." Read that line carefully. Movement becomes punishment. Every instinct, every human reflex, transforms into a mechanism of torture. Medieval physicians recorded the devastating results: corneal perforations, leaking aqueous humor, infections that sometimes reached the brain. And yet many women survived, mastering a terrifying kind of stillness, restricted to a narrow cone of vision barely 30 degrees wide. Imagine that. Months, sometimes years, living in a world where a glance could kill you. And as horrific as the spikes were, they were only the beginning. What came after the damage, what happened to those women once their eyes were injured, reveals a motive far darker than punishment. It was about control, inheritance, and financial gain. So what exactly could a woman do that merited such extreme punishment? Court records from the 1330s reveal crimes that seem absurd by modern standards. A widow might be accused of glancing at a merchant while buying fabric. Another could face the mask for eye contact with a male pilgrim during Hajj, or even simply for watching a public execution. No adultery, no theft, just looking. Ibn Battuta, the 14th century traveller, provides some of the clearest accounts. In Persia, he observed women shuffling through markets, their vision restricted by iron masks, guided by male relatives. When he inquired about their offences, the answer was always the same. They had looked. But here's the part that turns the story from grotesque to calculated. Most of these women were widows or recent heiresses. They had inherited property, businesses, or wealth, but only if they were capable of managing it. And blindness? Blindness ensured they couldn't. Guardianship reverted to male relatives, the sons, brothers-in-law, or even business partners of their late husbands. The pattern becomes undeniable. Accuse a woman of an immodest gaze, apply the mask, wait for injury, then petition for guardianship. It wasn't morality that drove this, it was money. A 1340 Samarkand court record details 3 widows from the same merchant family, all accused of immodest gazes within 6 months, all masked, all injured, and all having their late husband's businesses transferred to a single male cousin. Coincidence? The odds are astronomical. Yet for centuries, historians misread these cases as religious extremism or societal rigidity. They overlooked the beneficiaries until Fatima al-Samarkandi. In 1347, she defied the system. She survived the mask, despite infection, injury, and the constant threat of death, and she testified. Her 14-page testimony, preserved in the Timurid archives, revealed an orchestrated conspiracy reaching the highest echelons of power. She named names, connected the dots, and exposed the financial machinery behind what had been disguised as moral correction. Fatima's ordeal began the moment her husband died, leaving her 3 goldsmith shops and a trading contract worth what would today be roughly $2 million. Within a week, her late husband's brother accused her of provocative eye contact with a customer. Male witnesses, all connected to the brother's business, testified against her. She was masked, and her life became a study in survival within a 30-degree cone of vision. She learned to identify people by voice, footsteps, even smell. One day, instinct compelled her to turn toward a child running through the courtyard. The spike pierced her left eye, immediate pain, followed by the dread of losing her inheritance. But Fatima's courage changed everything. She exposed a systematic plot, 2 workshops in Samarkand, both owned by members of the same merchant guild, producing iron masks that ultimately ensured wealth transfer. Receipts confirmed that the guardians paid for the masks that cost 6 months' wages, an investment calculated to secure multi-million-dollar inheritances. The mask wasn't the product, the inheritance was, and for once, the system couldn't hide behind religion. Sultan Abu, faced with this revelation, banned the masks entirely in 1348. All devices were ordered destroyed, guardianship stripped from anyone who had profited. Yet even with the ban, history rarely stops. The practice went underground. Injuries continued to be documented into the 1500s and 1600s, with the last known case recorded in 1687. And in 2019, a collector in Vienna unearthed a mask confirmed to be from 14th century Persia. Its spike still perfectly calibrated, the interior inscribed with a chilling dedication to the correction of the wayward. The story of these masks is more than just medieval cruelty. Between the 9th and 18th centuries, thousands of women suffered, not for their actions but for their capacity to see and their right to inheritance. And for over 200 years after the last known use, historians missed the financial motive entirely, cataloguing these atrocities under religious extremism alone. The voice of survival, Fatima, remained unheard until 2003. But here's the part that leaves you questioning everything. The tools have changed, but the playbook remains the same. Dress codes and modesty laws today are still weaponized to control women, restrict economic freedom, and justify punishment. The iron masks are gone, but their legacy lingers. And as we prepare to continue, remember this. What you think of as moral correction may hide motives far darker. When we uncover the next chapter, you'll see exactly how deep the conspiracy went, how the mask makers, the guardians, and even state authorities all colluded, and why some histories were deliberately erased. The next section will take us from Fatima's courtroom defiance to the shocking conspiracy that almost no one has ever seen. After Fatima's testimony, the scope of the conspiracy became horrifyingly clear. This was no random series of injustices. It was a meticulously engineered system spanning merchants, craftsmen, and authorities. There were only 2 workshops in Samarkand authorized to produce these iron masks. Both were controlled by the same guild, a guild with a vested interest in the misfortune of widows. Every spike, every lock, every carefully measured millimeter of metal was not just a tool of punishment. It was an investment, a way to funnel wealth from independent women back into the hands of men. Fatima uncovered receipts. In medieval Persia, every transaction was recorded, from the trade of silk to the commissioning of a mask. And these receipts revealed the truth. The guardians paid handsomely for the masks, expensive masks, devices that cost roughly what a skilled craftsman would earn in 6 months. When you consider that, it becomes chillingly clear. The masks weren't about modesty or moral correction. They were venture capital, designed to secure inheritances worth exponentially more than the cost of creating the instrument itself. Her testimony also revealed a pattern that spanned decades. Fatima compiled the names of 23 women over 5 years, all widows of wealthy merchants, all accused of the same crime, all masked by the same 3 guardians. And in every case, within 6 months, the women's inheritance had been transferred to male relatives or business partners. It wasn't just systemic, it was deliberate, repetitive, and astonishingly profitable. The implications reached beyond local guilds. Fatima's evidence showed that the craftsmen themselves were complicit, knowingly creating devices intended to maim women. They weren't simple metalworkers. They were enablers of a criminal financial network, producing tools to extract wealth under the guise of religious correction. And when her testimony reached Sultan Abu, it forced a crisis of legitimacy. If the Sultan didn't act, he would implicitly validate a system of fraud embedded within the legal framework of the state itself. So he did something unprecedented. In 1348, Sultan Abu issued a decree banning the masks entirely. They were labeled as instruments of false piety, tools that masked theft behind the facade of religion. All existing devices were to be destroyed, and guardianship rights stripped from anyone who had profited. For a fleeting moment, it seemed like justice had been restored. But systems built on oppression rarely disappear quietly. Even after the Sultan's decree, the practice continued in rural areas beyond the Sultan's reach. Medical texts from the 1400s, 1500s, and early 1700s still mention women injured by mysterious iron devices. The last documented case appeared in 1687, a woman in a village outside Isfahan, blinded by a device that her grandson would later describe as traditional. The masks had gone underground, leaving a shadow trail of injuries, fear, and lost wealth that remained largely invisible to historians. Fast forward to 2019, a private collector in Vienna acquired what he assumed was a decorative piece of armor. Metallurgical testing at the Museum of Islamic Art in Berlin revealed it was a 14th century Persian iron mask, calibrated with the same terrifying precision as described in historical accounts. 3 millimeters from the cornea, the same width as 2 human hairs, and etched inside, nearly invisible, were the words, "For the correction of the wayward." It was a physical testament to centuries of abuse and a chilling reminder of what happens when cruelty is legal, calculated, and profitable. Fatima's courage was unique, but her story also sheds light on the thousands of women whose suffering went unrecorded or misinterpreted. Between the 9th and 18th centuries, 2,000 to 5,000 women endured these masks. Some for days, some for months, some until permanent blindness took their sight. For centuries, historians catalogued these devices under religious punishment or societal extremism, rarely asking the follow-up question, who benefited? It was only when Fatima's testimony was translated in 2003 that the financial motive finally came into focus. Her story is not just a historical curiosity, it's a warning. The tools have changed, but the strategies remain the same. Dress codes, modesty laws, and punitive measures today often echo the playbook used to control women in medieval Persia. The masks may be gone, but the underlying logic persists. Limit vision, restrict autonomy, and redirect power and wealth to those already in control. The parallels are uncomfortable but undeniable. History's darkest moments are often preserved not in the textbooks we read, but in the silent gaps, the documents left unexamined, the voices that weren't listened to. Fatima's Iron Veil is one of those voices, speaking across centuries. It challenges the narrative of religious extremism as the sole driver of cruelty and forces us to confront the intersections of power, gender, and economics. The aftermath of her testimony was immediate for the few involved, but the legacy of the masks lingered. Even with Sultan Abu's ban, rural communities continued to enforce similar punishments, and legal loopholes allowed the same type of wealth transfers under different guises. The structures of oppression had been normalized so thoroughly that the law alone couldn't eradicate them. It took active, brave witnesses, like Fatima, to expose the system. What makes her story extraordinary is not just survival, but revelation. She mapped a network spanning craftsmen, merchants, and legal authorities. She revealed how religious justification masked financial manipulation, and she connected each act of punishment to a clear beneficiary. Fatima didn't just survive, she rewrote the record, providing the evidence that historians had missed for centuries, and yet, for centuries after, these records remained buried. Until 2003, few had the chance to study her testimony in full. Museums held the physical masks, archives preserved the fragile documents, but it took deliberate scholarship to connect the dots, to reveal the economic incentives hidden behind claims of moral correction. The story resonates today because power finds ways to replicate itself. Laws, rules, and customs that claim to protect morality or honor often serve as instruments of control. Women's freedoms, especially economic independence, remain vulnerable to manipulation under the guise of cultural or religious authority. The Iron Mask is gone, but the logic behind it is still in play. Control, restriction, and coerced obedience continue to shape societies worldwide. And here's the chilling reminder: the tools may evolve, but the strategies endure. Between the 9th and 18th centuries, thousands of women lost not just their sight, but their autonomy. For 200 years, historians misinterpreted these devices, cataloging them under religious extremism without ever asking the critical question, who profited? Fatima's voice, once ignored, now challenges us to look deeper, to question historical narratives, and to recognize the systems that continue to constrain freedom today. The Iron Mask sits quietly in a museum archive, hidden from public display, yet its story resonates more loudly than ever. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth. History is not just a record of events, it is a ledger of power, greed, and the lengths to which humans will go to control one another. And until we listen to the voices that survived, like Fatima's, we risk repeating the same horrors under new guises. History hides its darkest lessons not because they are irrelevant, but because they are inconvenient. The question now is not whether the Iron Mask existed. It did. But how many modern masks remain, controlling, restricting,